as you want. So I'm open for questions, or if you'd like me to talk about something or tell you something in particular, you tell me, because there's too much.
Yeah, so much. I'm looking at these shutters here. What'd you call it?
It's a screen I did,
screen,
and
is
it's
it
when I
canvas?
was doing my weaving. And I'd sit there and I'd weave colors together. And that's
Canvas?
No, that's bifold doors like you have on a cabinet that my husband put together for me. And I have, you can't see it, but on the bottom it has some aluminum pieces of sculpture that was not so successful that I put on it as feet.
Oh, okay.
It was not a successful sculpture piece. And I'm not doing any more bifold screens until I sell them.
I've been wondering about the cloud sculptures, which I really love. Is there?
The cloud sculptures, I did, I got finished with graduate school in December of '79, and I was doing cast aluminum. And I lost my foundry facilities, and I was getting free aluminum. So I started to do cast polyester resin. And this is Purple Rain before Prince did Purple Rain. And my former teacher, George Rowan, did clouds, and you never do what the teacher did when you were in their class. But when I finished, I wanted to do my versions of clouds. And that's Purple Rain. This one's Hope, because I hope it didn't fall over, because it had a balancing problem. And eventually I got out of the sculpture because it was so physically difficult, and the resins were starting to make me ill. So they're very old, the sculpture pieces.
They're beautiful pieces.
Tell us about your architecture, because the only architectural interior I see is that one. Which is
Well, I did a whole series of architecture pieces.
Okay.
And if you care to look at it, I'll show you this book that's down here. In '96, I was showing at Gracie Fraga had a gallery and magazine, and I did a whole series of architecture pieces. I studied one summer architecture at Tulane because my husband's a civil engineer, and I wanted to know what the architects knew that I didn't know, and I went back to school. My son was taking a computer class at Tulane as a high school student, and I said, oh, I might like to do that, and I already had a graduate degree in art, was already teaching art. But I spent the summer in architecture school, and I decided they don't know anything that I don't know, and I really wasn't a student anymore, and I wasn't paying anymore for somebody to judge my work. It was not something I wanted to do. So I started to do a whole series of architecture influenced by that. And first I would do, this is an old piece. I did this when I was teaching high school. One time I called it the teacher because I wanted to show you how you can make foam with color where the forms come out, and not just black and white, but having values and colors that would create space. And they used to be fascinated by things that floated, and they used to be fascinated by glass. So in that picture I combined all the elements that my students were fascinated with. And I did that, and I made it small so I could carry it around, because I have a tendency to do, I used to have a tendency to do very big things. Now I'm calming down with smallness. And then I did a whole series of architecture pieces that you don't see in this room. But you can look at my book if you wanted to. And in White Linen Night, I don't know if it was '96 or something like that, Doug McCash had picked a few pieces of mine to be in the architecture show at White Linen Night at the CAC. And I got tired of doing tops and bottoms. I would do architectural push-ups. I would find different interesting architecture and put it top to top or bottom to bottom, and just slice it in different spaces so you'd have a solid space, a real space, but you'd have it more interesting. And I sold quite a few of them, not through the gallery, but when it was just, you know, friends of mine would buy them. They liked them. They were decorative, but that's where they came from.
What years were you teaching the high school where everybody was fascinated by the floating in the glass?
I was a graduate teaching assistant. I just got something in my throat. I'm not nervous, I just talk too much. When I was a graduate teaching assistant, my work was about to come to an end, and Peggy McDowell, who taught art history at UNO, asked if I wanted a job teaching. And I said, I don't know. And I stayed there for 13 years with an I don't know, teaching high school students half the day, teaching college a course at a time in the afternoon, and then eventually I stopped because I was working too much. And then I just switched to teaching college, and eventually they made me full-time.
What period of time approximately, like the 90s, 80s?
80s. I graduated from graduate school in '79.
Interesting.
And I was a return student.
In what high school?
Gaines High School, which is no longer around.
Oh, yeah.
And then I would teach at the college at night, because my dad knew a nun. Yes.
Carol, I noticed that by looking at all your work, of course, I assume that it all comes from different periods.
Yes, it does.
And then your decorative arts on the chairs.
Yes.
I guess I wanted to ask you, do you have like a favorite period, or do you know what
I have
period?
favorite pieces.
Okay, favorite period.
I have favorite pieces out of each
You
period.
do, yeah.
Yes, I do. And those are the ones that cost more than the rest. But unlike Angelina, 99% of what you see is for sale.
How do you go about selling?
I am at Jean Bragg, but I just sell them from word of mouth. I'm not good at business. If you don't really want it, you can't have it. And if I know you and you really want it, you can pay me $100 a month till you paid it off.
Oh, that sounds good.
No
It does.
interest. Because I believe people, if they really want something and they're honest, I want them to have it. And I always work. No matter what I'm doing, I'm always working. I'm always working on something. There's not a period in my life that I haven't worked. When I had breast cancer in 2003, I did breast cancer pieces, and I'd come home and I'd paint. And that's one of them. And I have a Band-Aid on the right side of the person, and my breast cancer was actually on the left. But I was sitting there painting it, and I had the paint on one side, so I accidentally put it mirror image when I was doing it, which I thought was really interesting. You know, you're thinking, you're looking at it, and you're feeling when you're painting. Okay, if there's no more questions.
Well,
What
I
about
want to know how you
self-portrait
can
with
go
the
about
cards?
selling these things, but if they're in your home, I'm just curious because we have one young lady here who's good at business, and the marketing, I like to see artists, I love to see talent able to sustain life rather than getting a job with something else.
Well, I have been fortunate. My husband's always supported me. But now he's retired and sick, so things have changed. But you wanted to know about the cards.
Yeah.
I did a whole series, because I work in series, and then sometimes I revisit it, where I did Every Child Draws That Simple Little House.
Oh, I remember
Shaped
your whole
like that.
series.
And I did a whole series of houses. And inside the house you did something, and outside the house you did something. And this was one of my final ones where I put a house of cards around me, and inside I was finding myself. And it's before I had a good camera, and I had a friend take some pictures of my head. And it has the quote from The Wizard of Oz in it, you know, in a one-point perspective. But my first house I did was a house with barbed wire wrapped around it. I sold it. And then I did one with twigs on the inside of the house instead of the outside. Then I did one with candy on the inside. And I did one with spaghetti house. And then I got more women things, and I sold 3 of these. I sold 4 of them. One of them I had Barbie serving martinis with the old Barbie on the inside.
I remember that.
And on the outside, I had Wonder Woman flying around. And then I had one with the Blessed Mother on the inside of the house. And on the outside, I had a Gorilla Girl, the Odalise Gorilla Girl portrait. And then another one I had little bitty tiny Aunt Jemimas with yellow aprons. And then on the big part of it, I had Marilyn Monroe with the yellow apron taking her apron off. You know, that she turned into Marilyn Monroe when she lost her apron. And I had pink ribbons that were coming undone on it. So that was a surreal kind of picture. And in 2008, I started with the crystals because I started with using a digital camera. And that's a longer story than that, but some of you have already heard it from me. If you really want to hear it, I'll tell it again. But I bought a $10 sheet of paper. And I wanted to know, what should I paint on my $10 sheet of paper? What was worthy? And my husband has a christening dress that belonged to his grandmother that was born in the late 1800s. So I photographed this dress because it's always easier to work from a photograph than it is to keep this elaborate christening dress hanging out, working from it. And when I finished that, I walked around my house and said, well, what can I photograph to paint or draw? And that's when I did the crystals. This was number 1, the one with the blue background. Number 2 was next to it. And they took me a month and a half of 8-hour days. You know, it was not something that I did quickly. But I'm at the stage, if I can't do something wonderful, why bother at all? Mediocrity does not, I don't need to do stuff. There's no reason for me to do stuff. If I don't keep a high standard for myself, and there's many things I've done that I don't like, but if I don't endeavor to do something, and part of it is showing off virtuosity, instead of just slashing paint down. I certainly don't need any more things to hang in my house.
You sure?
And that one was number 3, and that's one of my absolute favorite pictures, the one with the crystal ball. And I play with the photographs, and I tweet it with little things in the computer with the color. And now I'm really just getting tired of doing still life arrangements. I want to branch out. I did one that I sold recently with a Degas ballerina seen through a piece of crystal. I did another one that's behind that piece of sculpture that is a Picasso seen through the piece of crystal, but it gets a little confusing. It's not as readable. I thought it was a grand idea. It's on the ground. And then I did, my grandson Jack has a trumpet, so I did the trumpet, because instead of doing crystal all the time, I thought of doing reflective surfaces or something else. And then I did the violin, and now we don't have any more musical instruments in the family.
How are these musical instruments going? Do people love them? I really like them.
I've only done 2, and they haven't been shown yet anyplace. Angelina's Facebook. I joined Facebook because a friend of mine's daughter got married, and if I wanted to see the pictures, I had to go on Facebook. So I put the trumpet on Facebook. A few people liked it.
Oh, did they ever? They loved it.
21st century art.
Beautiful.
Facebook.
And you know, the family loves it. I don't know what. Yes.
I wanted to ask about those guns. Where did you get that idea?
Well, my husband likes guns.
Oh, okay.
That's one of his hobbies.
And the lightsabers?
I was just trying to think of what images to go with it. In 2005, before Katrina, I did a series with musical paper torn, the red beans and other things. There's one in the hall with crawfish. There's one over that door with little rubber duckies. It was part of a Louisiana series. I sold one that was a big fish, another one's hanging in a grandson's bedroom. But in the 80s, I had done a series with newspaper. I sold most of them. Newspaper and crawfish. And I was drawing the newspaper. But I didn't want to do the newspaper again, so I did torn music. And that was, you know, the things that I did before Katrina. If you go in the kitchen, there's a piece that I did on a door that was the last thing I did before Katrina, and it is the 5 seasons: spring, summer, winter, fall, and death. And I thought that was really eerie, that's where my mind was. The last thing I did before Katrina. I thought that was kind of weird.
Just a technical question. Do you put a layer of urethane on? How do you get that shine?
Polyurethane is what I'm using. I used varnished at first. First I started with art store varnish, then I switched to hardware store varnish, and now I'm using polyurethane because it does not yellow. But I use all-base. Even though my paintings are acrylic, I use all-base polyurethane on top. And what I'm doing now is I'm using pencil colors on board. And I'm not putting them behind glass. The trumpet is 100% pencil colors on board with the polyurethane coating. But you've got to be careful. Sometimes you can make things run. I'm still not 100% on telling you exactly what will work every time you do it because I'm still working on it. Yes.
Why do you use oil rather than acrylic over your painting?
Because I bought it and it doesn't work that good. It's not as perfected. It doesn't coat as well. It kind of beads up. And I'm just telling you, every so often I try it.
Yeah.
And I don't like it. Water cleanup is fine, but if it's not doing what you want it to do. And right now,
I found the same
the
thing.
best thing I have going is I'm using an acrylic media on top with my picture upright. And I do it like I'm painting on top of it, and if it runs, then I wash my brush and stop and let that part dry and then do a little bit more till I seal it all, and then I put the oil-based polyurethane on it. I'm not good at framing. I spend a lot of money on frames. So with doing that, I'm not framing it behind glass. I can't cut matte good. It looks like a hack. I'm not any good at it. So I started to do this kind of like as a self-preservation method, and also like the way it looks better. I like that it looks more like a painting than anything else. Because people don't want to buy things on paper sometimes.
I think you should have a price tag on all of them, so we can look at them, so we can dream.
$2,000 for those, either one of those two, but not for my favorite. My favorite has to be paid more. But I don't sell things too expensive. I'm moderate, I think. Yes.
Yeah. Are these, is that a masonite board? Or
Yeah.
Canvas, masonite board?
This is a masonite board here. But these are older. This is another, I did a whole series of water patterns. And I like doing it on something smooth. And that's just acrylic paint. And I did it on watercolor paper. I made 20-something water pattern pieces. And if you want to see them, you just look at my book.
But with the,
Where is the book? Who published it? Did you publish it?
No,
No,
this is
it's clips.
picture
Oh.
scrapbook.
This is just my
Scrapbook.
picture book.
Oh my God.
I
With
thought I could go to the bookstore
With
and
the
buy it.
masonite, do you put anything underneath it? Or you
I
just
gessoed it.
gesso and then
Right there.
This is my book. That's me.
I was thinking I could go to the
graduate
bookstore and buy
Some
it.
people don't know what it was.
Oh, I owe pictures for that book.
I
have
use
two up at my
everything I
house.
can buy. I
I
make
do. I
nothing.
gotta bring back.
masonites from Laurel, Mississippi.
Okay.
What
That's where
price
the
range are
factory
your
is.
water patties in?
My water patties.
Did you say?
My water patterns. Make me an offer. They're old. You know, when something gets old, but I like them in these locations.
They're great.
And so sometimes you work on masonite, sometimes you work on canvas.
This was before you could buy that big of a canvas. I did
Yeah,
these.
and masonite was cheap too.
Yeah, but it
Now
was
you
before you
can't-
could buy a canvas.
It's
But you
that
have
big.
to frame it.
They don't.
Masonite, you have to frame.
It's
Yes, I did,
expensive.
but my husband framed those when he was in good health. He could do lots of stuff.
Masonite's a great medium. I love it. It
Uh,
used to be cheap.
But now I'm buying more archival things because I'm frightened. But these are old, and I do a portrait of each of the grandchildren when they turn 2.
How many?
4, 2 girls and 2 boys. The oldest son has 2 boys, and the youngest has 2 girls. Okay, anybody else?
Nice balance.
No, it's wonderful.
Where, I'm gonna ask the question that you asked me, where are you going now?
Well, right now I'm doing a piece of a crystal cake dish. It's upstairs. And I don't mind if you walk upstairs. My husband's in one of the rooms.
I was
He might
wondering.
have the door closed. He was down when some people first came. I gave this crystal cake dish to my daughter-in-law Tiffany because she's a baker. And then I had to borrow it back so I could photograph it. So I could do it because I was tired of doing all the crystal I had. I needed new crystal to be inspired from. And it has a red velvet cake that I enjoyed eating every slice out of after I drew it. I finished the cake. And this is usually not here. I usually have